All right, why don't we start the icebreaker, Sydney?
Okay, will do. Um, so just to begin, my name is Sydney. I'm the policy fellow here at Act on Mass, and I will be leading this workshop along with the help of Scotia, who is our executive director. And this is our State House 101 workshop. So here's our quick agenda in case you want to have an idea of what we're going over today. We'll talk about the state government, some issues that we're facing in our state house here in Massachusetts, the state budget, how that gets passed, what it's looking like for this year, and then different ways you can approach talking to your own legislator and how we can all work together to bring more solutions to the state house. So, in terms of intros and icebreakers, feel free to introduce yourself, give your name, pronouns, where you're from, or where you're currently at, as well as some political areas and issues that you're passionate about. And you can add those in the chat or you can speak out. We'll give a couple minutes for people to respond to these questions.
Mm.
All right, awesome. I see Western Mass and very concerned about how ICE is in our state and how Massachusetts is dealing with that in our immigrant populations.
Mm.
Reproductive justice, Newton, Cambridge, climate legislation, and transparency. Thank you, Scotia.
Surprise.
Yeah, so we'll give it another minute. We're just going through some icebreakers. I know someone just joined from the waiting room. And then we'll begin.
Yeah, Vivian. These are such great answers. One of my favorite things about this movement for a more accountable state house is just how many people have an interest in it across so many different issue areas. You know, we all have reasons to want a more functional state legislature.
I agree. Um, well, feel free to continue putting answers into the chat, but I think we can get started with the rest of our presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Scotia for a moment to give a little introduction of who is Act on Mass.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And Sydney has prepared a fabulous presentation. Um, just to give a brief background, if you're new to our work, Act on Mass is a 501(c)4 nonprofit that's been around since 2018. It was founded by activists, focused on improving our legislature, making it a better place to organize. And that continues to be our mission today, to strengthen our democracy in Massachusetts, recentering constituent voices in the conversation and ensuring that every resident in Massachusetts has the tools at their disposal to hold their own representatives accountable and to demand greater accountability from the system itself. So we fight through this mission through a variety of ways, including advocating for good governance policies in the legislature. We work as a government watchdog, tracking legislation through the state house and kind of bringing attention to the ways in which it's disrupted in its progress. We also host workshops. A huge part of our mission is really getting the word out there. And we also do some electoral stuff. So yeah, I think, is that just all I have to say about Act on Mass?
Yep.
Great. Well, then to the workshop.
All right, so State House 101, we're going to start off by going over some info about the state government and some jargon that you might hear us talk about or other people talk about in relation to the state government as well. So to begin, just for reference, at the federal level, we have the president, our US senators who represent us from Massachusetts, and we have House representatives. For example, this is Minority Whip, so she helps to keep a lot of the Democratic Party in line in DC, but she is one of our representatives from here in Massachusetts as well. At the state government, we have a pretty similar situation. We have our government, or our governor, rather. We have our state senator and our state rep. So the executive branch, which is the president at the federal level or the governor at the state level, signs bills into law. They have power to veto legislation, and they also are elected to 4-year terms.
Oh.
And then the legislative branch, it's our senators and representatives. So they draft and pass legislation, which become laws. And we have bicameral legislatures, meaning there's two different chambers. So we have our House of Representatives and our Senate. So on Beacon Hill, this is who my elected officials look like given where I live. So our governor for all of us in the state is Governor Hille. My state senator is Senator Jalen, and my state rep is Representative Barber. So a quick little overview of how a bill becomes law. There's definitely a lot more to this process, but here are some of the basic steps, the basic breakdown, just for a common level of understanding if we're not all familiar. So first, a representative or a senator will file a bill. This bill is then referred to a specific committee. So for example, if this bill has to do with higher education, it'll be referred to the House Committee on Higher Education and the Senate Committee on Higher Education, if it's filed in both the House and Senate. This bill should then come to a committee vote after a committee hearing where people can voice their support or opposition to this bill. And if it's reported favorably, then it goes to the House and Senate for floor votes, where all representatives and senators are able to vote on this legislation. And if it is passed by the Senate and the House, and the language is the same for both versions, then the bill will go to the desk of the governor, where it's signed into law by Maura Healey. So just some jargon that's useful to have. Our legislative session is the time frame in which our legislature operates. So this is when they're doing the majority or actually all of their work, and this happens in 2-year-long legislative sessions. So for example, the 194th legislative session is our current session, which ranges from January 2025 to December 2026. And in this entire session, we have formal sessions and informal sessions. So formal sessions ranges from January 2025 to July of 2026, where it will then be the end of session or end of formal sessions. And informal sessions will begin. So formal sessions are just when the legislature meets to act upon committee reports, petitions, orders, enactments, matters from the other branch, and take roll call votes, which is very important because that is when legislators have more often than not, have a recording of how they're voting on specific pieces of legislation. But with the end of formal sessions, once we hit that July 31st, 2026 end of formal sessions deadline, then there will be no more recorded votes. Any single legislator can object and prevent a bill from being passed, and there is very, very little legislating actually happening for the rest of that year. So that's why it's important to keep in mind that when we're in formal sessions, that's when we want to see the majority of our legislation passed, because we actually have a better ability to keep track of what's being passed and who's supporting it. So, applying the jargon, this past January, we began our 194th formal legislative session. We have also seen the slowest start to a legislative session in over 40 years. So for some reference, this means that in the 193rd session, which was the last session, we saw about 10 bills 10 bills passed into law by this time in the session. And this year, feel free to put your guesses in the chat if you have any guesses as to how many laws we currently have passed in this session. Or you can shout it out. You can unmute and do that as well.
3.
Three. Good guess. Good guess.
None.
Admittedly, this got slightly less shocking because they passed another one yesterday, but
Yes.
it was not like a real law.
hmm Yeah. So we've seen a total of 6 laws passed, which isn't great, admittedly, especially when you look at kind of some of the stats from last session. So, for example, Fiscal Note reported that Massachusetts had the least effective legislature in the country in 2023. So that was when we already had about 10 bills passed into law by this time. So when you take that and kind of, put it in context for this session, we're on track to be the least effective legislature in the country once again. And this is not a very fun record to hold. As you can see, there are so many other states in our country which pass much more bills into law than we do. And especially with the federal crisis at hand, we're seeing a lot more constituents asking legislators and asking our legislator to act in order to protect us and our communities. For example, we've seen a lot of ICE raids where people are being taken away from their families and communities. We've seen Trump sign executive orders that target sanctuary cities, which are meant to be safe havens for immigrants like Boston. And we've seen proposed cuts to Medicaid via the big, beautiful bill, as they're calling it, and a lot of opposition to our strong climate laws and programs and projects that we have here in the state. So right now, everyone's on edge. Everyone feels the threat that's coming from the federal level. And even Speaker of the House, Ron Mariano, has admitted that the legislature has a responsibility to voters to be efficient and transparent and responsive to all of our concerns.
No, he just acknowledges that he has the responsibility, but he ain't going to do it.
Exactly. You took the words right out of my mouth. We've had the slowest start to a legislative session, as we've talked about, only 6 bills passed. Our joint rules have stalled out, meaning that the Senate and the House of Representatives doesn't really have set guidelines as to how they're meant to be legislating for this session. And Ron Mariano, Speaker of the House, earmarked $25 million for a parking garage in his district with fair share supplemental budget funds, which we'll talk about more in the context of everything later on in this presentation. But maybe keep that in the back of your mind. It might come back up as a talking point later on. So now to get into the issues that we're seeing here in Massachusetts at the State House. Scotia will talk on this. She'll talk about the lack of transparency that we're seeing and the concentration of power and leadership in our State House.
All right. Well, thank you, Sydney. It sounds like some of you guys have your own familiarity with kind of the frustrations, the trials and tribulations of our legislature. So if this is a review for you, feel free to, add stuff in the chat or jump in. Yeah, we want to make sure that this information is getting out there. So, we've seen that this is one of the slowest legislative sessions in the entire history of recent history of our own legislature. So they're kind of losing against their own record in the face of very serious federal crisis. And unfortunately, this is a little bit, even though it's worse this year, constituents being failed by, the legislature failing to deliver on popular, desperately needed legislation is a little bit more par for the course of how things have been going for the last couple of years. Even bills that are in the Democratic Party platform will just get killed without a vote by our Democratic supermajority legislature. And just a couple of bills on the right that are quite popular and we wanted to highlight them, specifically the Safe Communities Act. I know that a lot of folks in the chat said that they've been really worried about recent immigration actions. This is something that's been really weighing on me too. And, our House and Senate had the chance to act to pass legislation to protect our immigrant communities and to clarify our immigration law with respect to state authorities cooperating with immigration enforcement. And that bill has died in the House for the last couple of years. Another example is the Stop Wage Theft, which is a pretty no-brainer piece of legislation that would make it harder for employers to defraud their employees. It has a super majority of legislators as co-sponsors. So if it were ever brought to the floor, it would pass easily, but leadership has managed to block it from ever being brought to a vote. And unfortunately, that's true for a lot of the bills that we're seeing here. The piece of the committee vote is a really important piece of this process, because unfortunately, this kind of escalator of legislation becoming law is really interrupted at key points in Massachusetts, and one of these is the committee vote. So first of all, Massachusetts is currently one of the only states in the country where we don't have access to how our legislators vote, and each year less and less legislation is actually being brought to the floor of the House or Senate for a vote. So more and more work is being done in committees where we can't see how our legislators are voting. And yeah, it's kind of a black box. A lot of bills that end up in committee are sent to study, which is kind of a soft way of killing the bill, where rather than voting it down and taking an active stance or voting it yes, they will send it to study, which pretends that the bill in question will, be considered after further study, but it's almost never, the study is almost never done. It just means that the bill has been killed. And unfortunately, that has been the fate met by a lot of the pieces of legislation that we highlighted on the prior slide. So what's going on? It's obvious that Massachusetts has a democracy problem, and unfortunately, it's been getting worse over the last couple of years. But at Act on Mass, we tried to zero in on a couple of key parts of what's being interrupted. So on the left, we have an example of how state democracy ideally should work, in which there's kind of a relationship of accountability between voters and legislators. Every 2 years, the voter gets to select from a slate of their peers the person best prepared to represent them in the state legislature. And then, that legislator goes to work for 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, the voter is able to take a look at the votes that legislator took, the legislation that they passed, and decide, whether that person is worth reelecting or not. But unfortunately, how it works in Massachusetts, that relationship is interrupted by both the lack of transparency, so the fact that most of the lawmaking that we're seeing is happening behind closed doors, and the fact that so much of the power in our state legislature is concentrated in leadership, which means that most of our rank and file reps are quite disempowered to actually enact the policy agenda that they said that they were that they were elected for. And unfortunately, also, who's allowed behind those closed doors if it's not the constituents? It's corporate interests that have the money to be there, and highly paid lobbyists. So it ends up in a system of weak representation where the priorities that are shared by most of the Massachusetts population don't end up being enacted in law. So in Act on Mass, we break this down into two key parts. It's the lack of transparency in our state legislature and the concentration of power and leadership. So we're just going to talk about these two aspects of the problem quickly. First, to start off with the lack of transparency, you may have heard that Massachusetts is considered one of the least transparent states in the entire country, and a huge piece of this is the fact that most votes are taken in secret. So as of currently right now, House committees and joint committees have secret votes in their committees, and any votes that make any bills that do make it to the floor of House or Senate tend to be taken on unrecorded voice votes, where basically whoever's chairing just says what you see here on the right. The question comes on the adoption of the amendment. All those in favor say aye, all those opposed say nay, and then they'll just say, oh, the ayes have it, and nobody said anything. So we don't get a record of which of our legislators are opposing things or in favor of things. Next. So this is about the committee vote. So actually this year we saw a huge victory for our movement at the beginning of the year in response to, I think, probably the overwhelming victory of the audit question, in which 72% of voters said that they wanted more accountability. The House said that they were going to make a concession on allowing committee votes to be made public. But as Sydney mentioned, House and Senate haven't been able to agree on new joint rules. They've now spent almost 6 months trying to decide how transparent they're going to be or not. So as of right now, committee votes are still not public. Do you have a question, Vivian? I guess I'll just keep going for now. Cut in if you want. Um, Secondly, the legislature has exempted itself from public records law and open meeting law. This one always gets me. So we're the only state in the entire country in which all three branches of government exempt themselves from public records law and open meeting law. So that means that a town meeting in my hometown of Natick is subject to stricter reporting standards than our state legislature that decides the $62 billion budget. And also currently written testimony that's offered by the public for or against a bill is not made public. The last piece of this is no time. So bills are often rammed through with very little time for our rank and file representatives to actually read them. They'll be, many, many pages long. The public will get very little notice that a vote is going to be held, but also rank and file reps themselves will have very little time to read bills and actually be informed on what they're voting on. As it says, there's no minimum time to write and file amendments, no minimum time for representatives in the public to read an amendment before a vote. So it often means that our own legislators are taking votes on things that they're not super well informed on, which leads to them just kind of following leadership's lead. And also, it can be really difficult for the public to organize around a particular piece of legislation or amendment when we don't get that much notice that a vote is even going to be held. Don't just take our word for it. Unfortunately, Massachusetts ranks quite low in national rankings of transparency. So yeah, we were in the bottom 4 in the Open States Project scorecard, given a grade of F for transparency. And more recently, the Center for Public Integrity gave us an F, ranked as 40th in the nation for public access to information. Second piece is the concentration of power, and this is, just as important. Yeah, Lynn, do you have a question?
Yeah, and I maybe I'm incredibly naive over here. I just don't understand. You said that all three, pardon me, I'm getting over pneumonia. All three have decided that they're not going to disclose what the voting is. How do we change that? How do we? I don't understand how they can do everything in secret. How do we change that?
Yeah, well, you've come to the right place. This has been Act on Mass's kind of bread and butter issue for the last since it was founded. We have been advocating for public committee votes, especially for since Act on Mass's founding. We did do non-binding ballot questions in 37 districts around the state, where we found that by an average of 82%, Massachusetts voters want to see their legislators' committee votes. And we saw that for the first time. I mean, I was shocked at the beginning of this year because we have, organized in districts across the state. We've had people organize meetings with their legislators to talk about this, to get them to vote in favor of public committee votes. And legislators have been really reluctant to support transparency measures because leadership so opposes it. And then this year, the House said, finally, after years of organizing, that they would make committee votes public. So that's what they've said they're going to do. What we can do now is ensure that, they're held accountable to that promise. But so far they haven't finalized it in joint rules. So what we're trying to do is really keep up the pressure on them and especially get the word out, because the more constituents that know that they're operating this way, the less they're able to kind of operate with impunity in that sense.
I'm sorry. So I was going to say, if I understand what you're saying, then the only way we can get them to change that is to get our individual legislators to change their mind and say, okay, we'll make it public.
Yeah. So basically House leadership had finally conceded. The Senate has made their own committee votes public for several years. But most of the most kind of important work of legislating is done in joint committees where House and Senate have to agree to joint rules, and they haven't agreed to joint rules since 2019, in part because Senate wanted to make committee votes public and the House hasn't. So this year they said, okay, finally we're going to make committee votes public. They haven't agreed. So theoretically, our own legislators have all now voted for a package that includes making committee votes public. but they have not yet like reached a conclusion in negotiations. So what we've been trying to do is really keep up the pressure on them to finalize the transparency changes that they said they're going to make. And that's kind of the piece that we can do. Unfortunately, because this pertains to House rules, there's little that that we as constituents can do. Like we couldn't take this to the ballot for a binding question, for example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
Vivian.
can I ask two questions? So when a committee vote is made public, the vote is individually recorded so that we would know how each legislator voted.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay. And when the when they vote, in the assembly by voice vote, do we know the numbers of ayes and nays?
No, it's not recorded.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Okay, that really is ridiculous.
Yeah, so they basically, I mean, we have a video of it. They just
Right.
they don't even break what they're saying. Like it's hilarious to watch. They basically say, no, they don't even nobody says aye or nay. They just know how the vote's gonna go because leadership's already predetermined it. So they'll say, oh, this vote will be taken by, by a call of the ayes and the nays. The ayes have it, and then they just move on. So yeah, there's no record of how many even there were. All right, just to move on, we've got a spot for questions too in a second. So if anyone has anything to add then. Here to focus on the concentration of power and leadership. Yeah, we have a system where our own representatives are very disempowered to represent us. So the Speaker of the House and the Senate President have an enormous amount of power over everything that happens in the building. They choose leadership positions, committee chairs, committee assignments. They have control over what bills come to the floor, and they also control the amendment process. And there's kind of this whole hierarchy of leadership that allows this kind of complete power to maintain itself. And it's worked similarly in the Senate. The Senator Karen Spilka, the Senate President Karen Spilka has also, a huge degree of control over her membership. Next slide. Yeah, this is propped up by some of the party leaders, including the majority leader in each chamber. They work really closely with the Speaker and the Senate President to ensure that the Speaker's priorities are carried out. Then at the next level down, you have the committee chairs. And then these guys are kind of the power brokers for what bills make it out of committee. But it's kind of a natural rule that nothing without the Speaker's pre-approval makes it out of committee. So these folks are there to kind of take the fall for popular legislation that's going to die in committee. They have, incredible power. And on the left, an example, Aaron Mickelwitz, who's the House Ways and Means chair. These are also enormous party leaders. So unfortunately, rank and file reps have very little special privileges. They can file bills and co-sponsor them and vote on bills when they make it to the floor. But they're kind of up against this system where you kind of have to play by the game in order to be able to deliver to your constituents. Leadership has a number of ways in order to maintain this control over the membership. One of them is the stipend system. So rank and file representatives, the only way for them to boost their base salary is by chasing these stipends that are associated with leadership positions. So as you move up in that ladder, as you become a committee chair or a party member, a party leader, your pay also goes up, and that is unilaterally decided by the Speaker or the Senate President. And these can be taken away when folks kind of run afoul of leadership. There are multiple examples of lawmakers being demoted, of losing these kind of key pieces of their salary because of choosing to vote a way that the Speaker or Senate President didn't like on a bill. Our elected officials, unfortunately, are being made to work for the Speaker and the Senate President rather than working for their constituents. So it ends up in a system where most of the time legislators are voting just with their with leadership. There's this really funny example. Sometimes we play the video, but I think we'll have to cut it for time. There was a vote in 2019 taken and whoever was putting in the speaker's vote on the board accidentally voted no when it was meant to be a yes. The speaker's position was yes. And you can watch all the rank and file representatives start voting no. And then somebody realizes, no, it's supposed to be a yes. And everybody switches to yes. So they just had most of the time, they have no idea what they're voting on. They're just following whatever, they see the speaker doing. Yeah, I think we'll skip it. But it's a funny video. It's on our YouTube if you ever want to check it out. So don't just take our word for it. This is an unfortunate quote from two former representatives who say that the House has become the personal fiefdom of the individual in the Speaker's office where absolute power corrupts absolutely. Next. Oh, I already said don't just take our word for it, but a quick case study. So there have been some research done into this. Specifically on the piece of climate legislation, which is actually what brought me to act en masse in the first place. Brown did a study on what delays climate action in Massachusetts, and one key thing that they found was that most climate legislation dies in committee where we can't see the votes. Major climate legislation that passed, anything that did make it, there's very little public dissent on it. So most of the time it's something that's been pre-approved by the speaker. And during this time, out of 245 climate bills that had been introduced, only 9 of them made it to the final stage. There's kind of a complicated, here we go. This is despite the fact that out of public testimony, almost 90% of it was in favor of passing climate change legislation. Only those opposed were members of the fossil fuel lobby. This is kind of a very difficult diagram, but what you can see on the left is this is the volume of bills that were introduced that were pertaining to climate legislation. And the red are ones that were opposed by the utilities lobby. Green is the ones that were supported by the utilities lobby. As you can see, most of it just never made it out of that first committee, but the ones that do are overwhelmingly those that are supported by the utilities. So things that were okay with the fossil fuel lobby. So even though public testimony was 90% in favor of climate legislation being passed, it seems that the people most effective at getting their agenda passed through the legislature is, in fact, high-paid lobbyists. So this is a key takeaway that there are 2 main checkpoints where the leadership exercises power is in that committee vote, ensuring that anything passed is things that are okay with their corporate donors. And members kind of get to hide behind the fact that their votes are not public. And then lastly, leadership controls what comes to a vote, so what's made on the floor. And a lot of these also aren't public, or they're not fully recorded. Here's another interactive question. Anyone want to guess what percent of Democratic representatives, and this is during the last session, voted with the Speaker of the House 100% of the time? So I'll say most of them did, but do you want to guess what percentage? Yes, it is 85%. So what that means is that 85% of Bay Staters that are represented by a Democrat are just being represented by the representative from Quincy. And Sydney put this as funny. Do 85% of Bay Staters live in Quincy? No. So why should Quincy's interests represent the rest of the state? As no hate to Quincy, it's a great place, but we should be having we shouldn't be in 100% in line with the speaker 85% of the time. Okay, here's the spot where we have some time for questions. Any questions about, we just covered a lot of things. If not, we will, I'm just looking at the chat. Another way that the speaker kind of maintains power is controlling people's office space. So, if you piss off the speaker, he'll put you in the basement. Folks have to work their way up to the nice offices for a really long time. Another fun one, this one is crazy, is that he assigns parking spots in the House garage. So if this has happened before, someone takes the wrong vote and they find their parking spot reassigned to a different building and they're walking further on their commute. I mean, it's just hilarious stuff. if it wouldn't, it would be hilarious if it wasn't so
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, there was another great question asking, how do we know who's fighting the good fight? So how do we know who is actually fighting for transparency? I'm assuming in terms of our legislators. That one was from the chat.
That would be my guess. You know, what, I mean, how do you know if your rep is doing what you'd want them to do?
Well, you can check out the offices in the basement to start. Yeah, I mean, Auditor DeZoglio is a really good example of that. I think, unfortunately, especially for a lot of the folks in the House, it can be really difficult to buck the system, and you will end up with fewer earmarks for your district, be less able to deliver for your constituents. One thing that I try to keep an eye on is when people do vote off from the speaker. I think that that's always kind of good because it's an expression that there is some difference of opinion and that people are willing to kind of stake some important things for that. So for example, this year there was a first term rep, Michelle Badger, who was the only Democratic member of the House to vote off from everyone else on a question confirming the audit. So it was expressing support for the audit that had been passed by 72% of the voters. Every single Democrat voted against it, except this first term rep, which was really, can I say, ballsy? Yeah. So I don't know. It can be hard to really tell, especially since a lot of the work that might be kind of behind the scenes expressing dissent, we don't get to see. But I would definitely look for, what is that 15% of Democrats that have voted off from the speaker at least once. I think we should probably move on to the next part of we want to keep going. But feel free to keep putting questions in the chat, and I'll also drop my information in the chat so that you can follow up with further questions.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take over now and talk a little bit about the state budget. I'll do my best to go through it quickly, but still get the point across. So the kind of annual budget season or budget process starts with the governor filing her suggestions or recommendations for what should be included in the budget with the House of Representatives. After she does that, House leaders change the budget to their liking and file their own version of the budget. So this is going to be House leadership like Aaron Mikulewicz and Speaker of the House Ron Mariano, who hold a lot of power in the budget process. Then the House votes on their budget proposal, and oftentimes they have to wade through thousands or over 1,000 amendments that lawmakers filed. So we talked earlier about how we have seen a very slow start to the legislative session and how not a lot of bills are actually being passed into law through the usual process. So the budget process is where a lot of the legislation that legislators are trying to have passed, whether that's funding for their districts or funding for a specific process, a lot of times they'll include these as earmarks in budgets. So included as different amendments that are then formed into consolidated amendments, which I'll kind of explain it in more detail momentarily. But once the governor's version and the House's versions are kind of drafted and being considered, Senate leadership then crafts their own proposal. So that's going to be Senate President Spilka, Michael Rodrigues, who is Senate Ways and Means Chair. The Senate then amends and votes on their budget, and a conference committee is formed to negotiate a compromise version of this budget in secret, which is then unable to be further amended. And the governor signs this into law, or I should just say signs it or vetoes the budget. And she can do that as signing to pass the whole entire thing or vetoing the whole entire thing, or she can go through it and say, oh, there's a specific kind of piece to the budget that she doesn't agree with, and she can kind of cross it out on the budget. So to go back to consolidated amendments, leadership often combines various amendments into a singular bill. So for example, we're talking about the budget. This happens a lot in our budget process because there's oftentimes in the normal legislative process, there's not a lot of opportunities for rank and file legislators to have their own legislation drafted and filed and sent to committee and things like that. So these large amounts of amendments are then turned into a handful of mega amendments that are voted on in bundles. And this process is, like I said, done behind closed doors, and all electeds are expected to vote yes on all of these consolidated amendments. And when an amendment is consolidated away, that just means that the amendments are said to be included in a consolidated amendment, but in reality, the language of that actual legislation no longer exists. So an example of this is Consolidated Amendment A, which could include a transfer fee, two line item adjustments, money for dog parks, money for specific districts like the speakers or the chairs. But when you look a little bit closer, you see that the only actual language that's included is money for the dog parks and the chair speakers districts, while amendments 1, 3, and 6, the transfer fee and line item adjustments, have been consolidated away, meaning the language no longer exists. So in the House, legislators only need the approval most of the time of Aaron Mikulewicz, who, like I said, is House Ways and Means Chair, to have their funding approved because he holds a lot of that power. And if you're not part of legislative leadership or in their favor, chances are you won't receive all of the funding that you're requesting in the amounts that you're requesting. And some rank and file reps don't even feel empowered to request that funding in the first place. So for example, in this year's budget, we saw that the lowest 30 earmarks in this budget, so the lowest amounts of funding given to specific districts, were given to Republicans and first-term Democratic representatives. So what this really means is that those who don't have the opportunity to have a closer relationship with House leadership oftentimes don't receive the funding that they're requesting for various projects in their districts, while representatives who are part of leadership receive the highest amounts of money, oftentimes over $1 million. So for example, Rep. Mariano, House Speaker, received over $1.3 million, and Aaron Mikulewicz received over $1.8 million. And then there's also a thing called a supplemental budget. So this is an additional budget that provides funding for other areas where there are funding shortfalls in the normal annual budget. And this funding that is used for supplemental budgets already has to exist. For example, with the fair share amendment, the amount of revenue that we received from that is about $1.3 billion in revenue. So this can be used in a supplemental budget.
Okay.
So another little quick interactive for you guys. In the fair share supplemental budget, Speaker Ron Mariano earmarks how much money for a parking garage in his district. And if you remember what we mentioned earlier, it might be helpful.
1.2 million?
So he received $25 million for a singular parking garage in Quincy. And although fair share revenue can only be used specifically for two things, one being transportation costs and projects, and the second being education costs, it is still really important to see how that is a really big amount of money. So HIP benefits, Healthy Incentive Program benefits, which help farmers give local produce to various people across the state, and also allows these people across the state to afford this produce. This funding was cut in the regular budget to $10 million. So just to keep that in mind, we're talking about lots of money and funding being kind of moved around in favor of those with power in the state house. So if you're feeling and thinking to yourself, wow, I really want to talk to my legislator about this, that's amazing. We totally feel that that is so important when it comes to transparency and accountability, talking to legislators, asking them what they're up to and how they feel about certain issues. But it's also important to remember that when you're talking to legislators, sometimes they try to talk nonsense, so to speak, and there's different ways where you can kind of bring these conversations to the table without having to worry about not getting a straight answer. So, for example, legislators may say that they co-sponsor bills. Well, co-sponsoring a bill is necessary for each and every bill, but it's not sufficient to getting legislation passed. Representatives regularly co-sponsor bills without having any intention of advocating for them or even voting for them if they did come to a floor vote. And a case study of this is an act to prevent wage theft, which has been introduced for years in our legislature and has had over a supermajority of co-sponsors in both the House and Senate, meaning that if it was brought to a floor vote, it would pass supposedly really easily, but it's never even come to a floor vote in the first place.
Why?
Because co-sponsoring is not enough to actually have these bills passed. So, for example, this is a fun little meme just to kind of show legislators may say, oh, where's the co-sponsor button? Oh yeah, I'll click it. Here, my job is done. I've done all I can to support this bill. When in reality, that's not all that they can do. And like we mentioned before, passing standalone bills, meaning bills that aren't consolidated mega amendments, has become history or for the most part in Massachusetts. So oftentimes advocacy groups are the ones who have to focus on gaining the favor of different members of leadership who are responsible for putting these bills together. So the result is that co-sponsorships are not really that meaningful. Also, we don't have recorded committee votes on specific language from specific bills or recorded floor votes for the specific language of these bills because they're all being consolidated away and we can't really see exactly what's being voted on. So how do I know how my rep really feels? Well, you can ask them about it. And there's three important things to keep in mind when you're asking your rep something, because oftentimes they can try to derail the conversation, bring up another topic, or try to talk about a totally different piece of legislation that you're not actually asking them questions about. So the three things you can do are calling them out, going big picture, and repeating your hard ask, meaning repeating what you asked them in the first place to make sure you get a straight answer. So if you're calling someone out, you can say, well, you're talking about this totally different issue and certain ways to address an issue, but let's bring it back to the topic I'm talking about. And you can go big picture. You can say, well, we all care about this issue. All of your constituents, my neighbors, my friends, we care about this bill, and we are asking you to support it because we know for a fact that X, Y, and Z. In this example, it's the lack of transparency in committee votes prevents us from passing dire legislation, which is very true. And then finally, you repeat your hard ask. You can say, with that in mind, will you commit to writing a letter to the speaker voicing your support and your constituent support for making all committee votes publicly available? So, like I said, these are just some simple ways where you can hold your legislators accountable. To make sure we have enough time, I'm going to go into some of the solutions that we have, which Scotia will actually be talking about before we go into our last segment of time for questions.
Well, as I said, one of the best tools that we have is getting information out there, because leadership is empowered when folks don't know that they have to pay attention. A lot of people think that, because Massachusetts is such a safe blue state or a progressive state that, we don't have to be engaged here. And that's how I thought. I always directed my political attention elsewhere for a while until I found out about just how bad things were in our legislature. So with that in mind, we have really doubled down on our outreach this summer and set a goal with this project called Transparency on Tour to visit every single Senate district in Massachusetts, 40 Senate districts, and speak with people, engage in conversation about their stake in our state democracy. Some of you guys on this call might have met us at one of these events in the last couple of weeks. So we're visiting farmers markets, town fairs, and community organizing events all over Massachusetts. We have done 5 districts so far, so we have 35 left. We have 7 dates coming up, and 28 more to go. So, a little bit about why we're doing this. We know from our work as advocates for the last couple of years, yes, this is being recorded, that when people are made aware of how bad things are in the legislature, they want more accountability from our legislators. And the best example was, or a great example was question 1 passed by the voters in November, in which 72% of folks in every single city and town across Massachusetts said that they wanted more accountability. So we know that when people are made aware that what's going on, then they do want more accountability. So it's offering us an opportunity to engage with folks in a different context where they might not be used to hearing about state politics, and also an opportunity for us to reconnect with allies. I know that even on this call, where there's 13 of us, we've got people tuning in from all over the state. And we're, our organization is based in the greater Boston area, so we really want to get the chance to reconnect with folks.
What is that blue city, town?
It wasn't a no town. It was just there was no data available.
Oh, okay.
I forget why. I don't know if maybe they didn't have enough votes or something like that. But
Okay.
yeah, it wasn't like a no town. It just, there was no voting data. I don't know why. Next slide, I think.
Russell, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. Admittedly, that's why we're doing the tour, so that I get to know other parts of Massachusetts a little bit better. Yeah, so what we know is that good state policy can protect us and our neighbors from the worst of federal overreach, or problems happening at the state level, like the housing crisis, or right-wing extremism in our own communities. We also know that they are trying to keep us out of the process intentionally, so that they can continue to deliver for their corporate donors, and make sure they never rock the boat, that they never have to take a controversial vote or anything like that. And that we, the people, can organize where we live to ensure that folks get the information they need to be plugged in, and ensure that our state leaders are held accountable. And to connect to a question I think somebody asked, this also, helps us improve our relationships with rank and file reps. Oh, this is what made me think of it, is, this idea of kind of rank and file reps being able to organize themselves within the legislature and challenge leadership. And in order to do that, they need to know that the voters are going to have their backs. And so by, reforming these relationships between voters and their legislators, by ensuring that there's kind of a back and forth of trust and accountability, we want our rank and file representatives to feel empowered to stand up against the big bosses, because they remember who their real bosses are. So if you want to join us on the road this summer, we are going to be visiting every district. I think we can drop in the chat of some of the updated ones that we have coming up, and we will be coming to a district near you. So here's some upcoming dates. And I don't know if we have a slide on this, but part of what we're talking about when we're visiting these folks, or these events kind of all across the state, is what we're calling our good government agenda. So this is our reform agenda. There's 3 pieces of legislation in the State House right now that would target these key issues that we talk about. So 1 on transparency, 2 on the concentration of power and leadership. 1 is the Sunlight Act that would reform a lot of the problems with things not being made public that we talked about. And we're also supporting a piece of legislation that would reform the stipend system to ensure that the Speaker and Senate President don't have unilateral control over legislator pay, in hopes that we can re-empower our rank and file representatives. And then thirdly, allowing legislative staff to unionize, because control over legislative staff is another way that leadership maintains power over the membership. So that's kind of the bread and butter of what we're advocating for. And we're hoping to, with a bunch of conversations and information sharing this summer, really build some of the power that we need to make some movement on those, and to ensure that that legislators understand that this is really important. So stay informed. We have a weekly newsletter, the Saturday Scoop, that comes out on Saturdays, where we break down the happenings on Beacon Hill. Maybe you already get this if you got here, but maybe not. Yeah, feel free to sign up for Transparency on Tour. Let us know about an event in your district you can also help us with. We're looking for farmers markets, community fairs, and the like. So if we haven't already held or signed up for an event in your district, and there's like, the one town fair that everybody goes to and that people are going to be at, we would love to have that information. And on the left is the form to join us to volunteer. So, we also want folks to join us at the table. Somebody can sign up to bring snacks. We're hosting carpools. This is going to be a big organizing effort this summer. So if talking to folks about this is something that interests you, I see from the chat that a lot of you guys have your own experience to draw from in this. I think that it would be great to have you on the road. So we can also drop that in the chat. Thank you for joining. Yeah, Sydney, do you want to close us out since you started us?
Yeah, that's pretty much all we have for today. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on and chat, or if you just want to discuss something of interest to you. We will definitely be in touch with more information about how to sign up for these events. Also, if you know of the tabling events, of course, and there's a question about how to become trained and educated. One way to do that is just by attending this in the first place. This is the first step. And we also always try to reach out to people via our Saturday Scoop and other additional emails about different events we have going on that you can become more educated and involved in the movement in.
I want to ask the audience about, does anybody know about anything happening in Quincy? We have not been able to identify a tabling opportunity in Quincy. And I'm just very eager to show up, in the backyard of the speaker to talk about transparency. So if anybody has any information about Quincy, please let Scotia know. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm dropping my email in the chat if anybody has ideas for Quincy. Yeah, grocery store parking lot is also something that we're interested in. So if you had a recommendation on that, that would be super helpful. Any other questions? Yeah, we have flyers at these tabling events to pass out that have some more information about our work. We're also handing out these accountability cards that have folks, state rep, state senator, information on them, so that they can, more easily engage in accountability with their own representatives. So that's a huge part of the tabling that we're doing. Just making sure that everybody has access to the resources they need to hold their own representatives accountable. And I think I mentioned this in the chat when related to a question from Kirsten, I think, but we also do these workshops for local groups. So if you have like a Democratic Town Committee, or if you are, work with an advocacy group that you think might benefit from more information about how our legislature works, feel free to reach out to me. I just put my email in the chat. Sense of legislator support for the reform. So the unionization effort, the staff unionization effort, has the most co-sponsors out of the 3 reforms. I think that Senate staff have gotten the right to unionize, but it has to pass both chambers for them to get it. So as of right now, it's one of the only workplaces in the state that it does not have the right to unionize. As for the Sunlight Act, we were able to get a Senate co-sponsor. So we have a bill in the Senate that has some co-sponsors from House and Senate, but there was no House member willing to file that as a lead sponsor. That's how, afraid rank and file reps are of taking steps for transparency. And for the stipend bill, even though it would boost legislator pay for most rank and file reps, there was nobody willing to take it on as a lead sponsor. So it's actually a citizen filed bill. But the goal is to kind of use these as tools to talk to folks, make sure that they are supporting them, and use it to structure conversations with legislators about transparency and why it matters. Great question. So for participating on the road, we do have a training document that should help you with the kind of basics of what conversations that we're hosting. Something that's helpful is that a lot of folks might have, background information or your own experiences with the legislature. So, that's experience that I might not have or Sydney might not have. So that's helpful. And then I would recommend too looking at our Scoop archive. So on our website, you can get access to previous scoops, and we kind of get into a lot of these issues with our weekly newsletter. We also have a page on our website kind of basically about transparency, where we get into a lot of these issues as well. So you can check out some of the resources on our website. Vivian, did you have a question?
No, I asked my question already.
Okay. Let me link the Scoop archive. How did I find out about this? So I came from climate background, and I was really focused on climate legislation nationally. That's what I studied, and I thought that I didn't have to worry about Massachusetts. And then I found out how much trouble climate activists in the state were having passing legislation through our supermajority legislature. So I joined Act on Mass as an organizer in 2020. And I was an organizer for in 10 districts around the state, and from 2020 to 2021. So I kind of became like a nerd for state policy, which is how I know a lot. And then Sydney has been with us for a year and a half now, Sydney?
Yeah, I think so, just about.
Yeah. So now we're both State House nerds, but it can start with a training like this. Any more questions before we wrap? I think I sent out my information. Here is for the win. I'm just sending the Scoop archive one more time. And if you sign up to table with us, so that's at our volunteer form, let me just send it one more time. You will receive our training document as well. And we would love to see you somewhere on the road this summer. So there's the link to sign up to table with us. Oh, it didn't work. Okay, let me send it again. It worked? Okay, awesome. Well, if that's all we've got, I think we will call it a night. Thank you folks for coming out. I hope to continue to be in touch, whether it's just, responding to a scoop or seeing us on the road, or getting in touch for another workshop for one of your organizations. And oh, one more thing you can do is bring this information to anybody in your life. So if you have family or friends, feel free to talk to them about this. That did you know Massachusetts is one of the least transparent states? 85% of Democratic reps, but whatever your takeaway from this night is, you are now empowered with that information to talk to other folks in your life, and that's a huge help to our movement. Thank you. I have been on Boston Public Radio once, and then I think I am going to be on WGBH this week. I just did an interview with a reporter there, so I do get to be on the radio sometimes, but I have not been on Jim and Marjorie. I know that they talk about transparency all the time because my mom texts me every time that they do. So that's kind of a dream slot for me. All right. Well, I think we're going to close the Zoom meeting, so I'm just going to stop the recording.